Welcome. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, NewsFile. And we are mourning Jerry John Rawlings, the founder of the Fourth Republic, and doing part 2 of unpacking the OSP report. So you have to stay with us. And here is Ayanini Legal Light. And I title it, Only One Vote, Only on Time. On election day, you have only one vote. Yes, you may vote more than once, but that is only if your name has been so entered as a proxy to vote for someone who is ill and unable to vote or absent from the polling station on election day. The law is that that person you are voting for must first have so appointed you not less than 40 days to election day, and the Electoral Commission must have entered your name on the proxy list. Polling or voting starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 5 p.m. You shall lose your right to vote if you get to the polling station before 5 p.m. But you are allowed to vote if you are in the queue before 5 p.m. You can make voting fun. All of us, we can make this fun. These are both constitutional and as captured in Regulations 25 and 29 of the Public Elections Regulations 2020, CI 127. That's your legal light. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This NewsFile is your most authoritative news analysis platform. I'm your host, Samson Ladi Anyanini. And this morning, J.J. Rawlings, founder of the Fourth Republic. And the second part is unpacking the OSP report, part 2. And we're asking a number of questions. Did the OSP do a sloppy job? CSOs and the NDC demand prosecution in the matter. Mahama is government official 1, says the OSP. So what? My guests this morning are starting with the people that you clamored should come back. Bright Simmons, Honorary Executive of Imani Africa. Dr. Yao Graham, Coordinator, Third World Network. And we also have Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba, who is Senior Lecturer, University of Ghana Law School. Andrew Ejapamesa, he's MP, 2nd and Vice Chair, Communications Committee of Parliament. Also, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh is the Executive Director of CDD Ghana. He has a perspective requiring and suggesting that every major contract or deal that the country must go into, maybe we must begin to submit it for a corruption risk analysis assessment before we go into the deal in the first place. How is that feasible? Is that another layer bureaucratic that may stop government machinery from operating smoothly? We'll answer all those questions on the show this morning. The Nation is a news or a media house, and it has an article, and in the article it says, among other things, that close associates of Jerry Rawlings claim that he was gifted with a sixth sense and an extra pair of nostrils, both of which have allowed him survive several attempts on his life. He sailed through life on a sea of fire and never seemed in danger of being consumed by it. Now let's listen to a few of these tributes, or as it were, condolences, sympathies that have been shared as he fell.
A great tragedy has befallen us as a country and as a family. Some 4 weeks ago, we were here to inform the presidency of the death of our mother, our grandmother, our sister, and the president, because of his special love for the ex-president, the former president, assisted us a lot in the burial of our mother. Just some few weeks or some few days after the burial, the former president, John Rawlings, fell sick and was hospitalized. A lot of efforts were made. I know the president was in touch with his brother. Little did we know that former president will leave us. So we've come here formally to inform the president and the entire government that this is what has happened. It is true. John Rawlings is no more. And we deem it appropriate to come and inform you officially.
On the one hand, he managed to send his mother off first, which was one of his concerns, which he made a point of mentioning in his tribute to his late mother. And as you rightly said, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh. And we cannot comprehend the reason why, but we do have to understand that this is the reality of our lives. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but the certainty is that death is something we all have to live with at some point. We have to face. Your Excellency, the family has only, things are still up in the air. We are yet to discuss the date of the funeral, and as such, what we can do today is to thank you once again for paying us a visit today and honoring us, and to let you know we will work closely with the Chief of Staff and with State Protocol to ensure that the wishes of both are honored as much as possible, both the family and of the state, to ensure that this goes off without a bit of a problem at all. We go through smoothly and honor the memory of the man he was.
Let me ask all of you to be outstanding in honor of the memory of the late president, first president of the Fourth Republic and former commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces, His Excellency Flight Lieutenant John Rawlings, one of your own, who yesterday joined his ancestors. May so, and the souls of all the faithful departed rest and abide in the bosom of the Almighty until the last day of the resurrection, when we shall all meet again. Amen.
In Ghana's history is a short and it's a positive one because he's responsible for ending coups in Ghana and is responsible for founding the longest period of stable democratic governance in Ghana's history. And so it's our duty as a party to ensure that his place in history is assured and guaranteed, and that we eulogize him for the role he has played in bringing us this far. And so we will start this meeting by taking an update. Happily, Uncle Dan is here, and he's a close family member, and so I'm sure that he will have more information about what the intentions of the family are. And certainly our party will play the role that we're expected to do in order to honor his memory. So welcome once again, all of you. And thank you for coming at such short notice.
My personal habit usually has always been to avoid big men, and so I have managed to avoid President Rawlings in all manner of circumstances.
Really?
Sometimes nearing rudeness by declining to take his calls. But
Wow.
you can trust him. He tracked me down. We had a mutual friend, and then his current aide, Dr. Benu,
Oh, yes.
had special duties to make sure that he waited for me in my office and tracked me and got me to meet President Rawlings. You have to meet him. He was a very intriguing and infectious character, and he commented on everything from my haircut to my tie, my shirt, my cufflinks, my shoes, my socks.
Yes.
And said that he was inspired. That Ghana had a future.
Oh, gosh.
He is just an infectious and intriguing individual.
No doubt.
And our generation will forever remember him, his leadership, his impact. Love or loathe him, he was a great leader.
And we greeted each other. So when somebody mentioned this morning, I couldn't believe it. So I was really shocked at the hear of the death of this wonderful person. So I've known him for a long time. I've known him since 1980, when I met him long time ago. And over the years I got to know him because of my work with the lepers and work with the Children's Hospital and work with the needy. And he was always there to support me. Always. Whenever he was always there ready to support me and help me in every way. So I must say I've lost a good friend. Man was a disciplinarian. You know, he had his views. Whether you liked him or not, he had his views, and he was a disciplined man, and that's what I liked about him. That he kept his views and he lived his views. So I must say, for that I will always remember him. And he was also one who encouraged. He always encouraged me in my priesthood. Always encouraged me in my work with the lepers and with others. After a sermon, he'd come and say, "Father, thank you for your wonderful words. Thank you." So his compassion, his discipline, this is what I liked about him. He always gave me the encouragement. He always supported me. Always there ready to support me in every way he could. He was there as a behind, because it wasn't easy. You look, working with these people are forgotten. He was always there to support me and don't give up, carry on.
Right. So you have been listening to a number of statesmen paying their last respects, so to speak, to Jerry John Rawlings. The Nation, report which I'm referring to, in celebrating him, says among other things that former Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, who staged 2 successful military coups in Ghana, ruled as a strongman from December 1981 to 1992, and then bent to the winds of democratic change, and was twice democratically elected president of the West African nation. He stepped down after 2 terms in 2001. it would be difficult to find a more down-to-earth former African head of state than Rawlings. Controversial and colorful, Rawlings was an inconsistent character. Right, so let me get to the studio now and pick the thoughts of my guests, just a minute or two each from all of them. Yes, Bright.
Obviously, it's our culture that when a person has departed us, we need to, in the first instance, commiserate with the people that were meant the most to him while he lived. So I certainly express my deepest condolences to Zanito, Yasantua, Amina, and Kimati, and obviously the spouse that he left behind, First Lady, Her Excellency Nana Adjumani Konadu Rawlings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I get Dr. Yao Graham to also say a word, I need to place on record that there are some other, if you like, some other statesmen that we had wanted to share, their thoughts with us. But for some reasons, we will keep it on a low key and just sharing, as it were, tributes for this morning. Dr. Yao Graham.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just extend my condolences to Mrs. Konadu Adjumani Rawlings and the immediate family and the extended family and those who were close to Jerry Rawlings.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Yao Graham. So we are in a time where even those persons, families, who, got on the wrong side, so to speak, or, suffered what you may call the excesses of the time under his regime, are even finding time to say something nice about him. Let's go to the phone lines and very briefly, take the words of Mona Korte, who is a former Deputy Minister of Finance, and also Betty Moldrisu, who also played various roles in the Atta Mills and John Mahama regimes, Education Minister, Attorney General. Right, so let's talk to Mona Korte. Good morning, thanks for joining us, Madam Mona Korte. Mona Korte.
Good morning, Samson.
Right.
Yes, indeed, we have lost a great officer, gentleman, past president, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. I first heard of him in June 1979 when I was in Achimota School. It was about a dawn broadcast, and we were very scared in school. Later, we found out there had been a coup d'etat, and it was by a young Air Force officer who had taken over the leadership of our beloved country. Fast forward, over a number of decades, more changes occurred in our governance system, and His Excellency President Rawlings became the first democratically elected president in our Fourth Republic. It was not until 1996, when I was working with Ashanti Goldfields Company as treasurer, that I met him on a formal basis. By this time, of course, my mother and the First Lady had been working closely to highlight the strengths of our Ghanaian women and to bring the women into the mainstream of our economy and even the governance system. Subsequently, the late president and I interacted on more formal basis every now and then, either in Obuasi or in Accra at head office, until one day, not too long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, when he told me that when he was in Achimota School, my mother and her older sister, who were seniors to him, he admired them very much. And then I informed him that my mother's elder sister had passed. He then invited us for breakfast at his home in Vume, together with his daughter, Zaneto Jatabi. And indeed, we saw the compassionate side of him. Our deepest condolences go to the family. We have lost a father, a president, an officer, a gentleman, our condolences to the family, and we pray that soon a young leader will rise again to make even better our nation. Thank you, Samson, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Mona Korte, former Deputy Minister of Finance. Let's speak to Betty Mould Idrisu, former Education Minister, former Attorney General. Thank you very much for joining us, Madam Betty Mould Idrisu. Do we have Madam Betty Mould Idrisu on? Okay, we don't have her, so we will just proceed to our programming, and we are going to do part 2 of unpacking the OSP report. We're asking a number of questions. Did the OSP do a sloppy job? CSOs and the NDC are demanding investigations and prosecution. The NDC is clear about that. It says investigations and prosecution. CSOs say there must be prosecution. And NDC wants a retrieval of what it says millions or billions of Ghana cedis that have been spent in an unlawful way. The OSP says President Mahama is government official 1. Today we ask, and so what? You know, he has sent a reply to President Mahama, who called his bluff and said he had done some rather, if you like, quote-unquote, stupid stuff. Madam Betty Mould Idrisu, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning again, Samson. I'm delighted to join your show on this very sad day. And to share a few thoughts about a very charismatic leader. I don't think that in Africa you would have found more charismatic a leader as the founder of our party. I knew him personally in 1965 when I entered Form 1 in Achimota School. I think he was already in Form 5. And immediately you would ask, who is that? You know, he stood out even at that time in his cadet corps uniform and his dark glasses. And I found him over the years to be a leader, disciplinarian. And I thank God for his life because he turned around the destiny of Ghana. He puts Ghana back on the track and has made us the envy of Africa. I think I can safely say that he's responsible for the reinstitution of our democracy and constitutionalism in the country. And I just wish that he had lived longer in order to see some of the ideals he himself espoused coming into maybe coming more into the limelight. I think that what I remember most about him was his passion for gender. He supported me and encouraged me immensely as a woman, and he also opened my eyes to the fact that it's not all about us who are lawyers and judges and doctors. No. Most of the time, you go anywhere with His Excellency Jerry John Rawlings, and he's there talking to the waiters, the drivers, the masses. He lived the ideals he espoused, and in leadership, it's an extremely difficult, extremely complex process. But I think he managed to live true to himself until this was untimely death. May God grant him peace, and may God also grant the nation of Ghana and its leaders the wisdom to carry us through this very difficult period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Betty Mould Idrisu. It would be difficult to find a more down-to-earth former African head of state than Rawlings. Controversial and colorful, Rawlings was an inconsistent character. He was asked a question and he said, quote, I have always wanted to be equal with everyone. Ask another question about what he would like or how he would like to be remembered, what he would like to be remembered for. He said, quote, my legacy to the people of Ghana, and that I never let God do anything for me. I did it first, unquote. We will be right back to deal with Ejapa. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. As I announced to you, my guest this morning, Bright Simmons, Honorary Executive, Imani Africa, Dr. Yao Graham, Coordinator, Third World Network, Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba, who is Senior Lecturer, University of Ghana Law School, Andrew Ejapa Mensah, MP 2nd D and Vice Chair, Communications Committee of Parliament, and Professor H.K.C. Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD. They will all be joining us for this discussion. But last week, this is where we ended with Bright Simmons and Dr. Yao Graham. So Bright Simmons, you said, as your concluding remarks and what was most important to you, you said, if we decide that we want to maximize our returns to gold, the place to look is not in royalties. Royalties is almost risk-free. This year, we may hit $300 million in royalties. Anybody who tells you that Ejapa is a brilliant deal because we will get $500 million upfront to go and invest in development projects doesn't understand the industry. In 2 years, we will make what we are going to make upfront. So we do not need Ejapa. Ejapa does not only fail the corruption risk test, it also fails the national interest and national economic interest test. Now, my question to you is about this last bit of what you had to say about solutions. Yes. You said, where we don't make money and need to create a vehicle to maximize is the equity. That's what you didn't have the opportunity to expand on. So can we begin on that note? What exactly do you mean?
So when you look at our gold industry, sometime in the 70s, a decision was made to increase the national stake in our industries, our gold industries. So most of you who follow the economic history in this country knows that the Champon regime stepped up ownership stakes. And then in time, some evidence began to emerge that we were having difficulties raising capital for investment. So we were underproducing. And I'm sure you remember the famous Ashanti Gold deals with IFC in the late 80s that restored capitalization of the mining industry. So given that history, it appeared as if we become increasingly friendly to government, the reduction of government stake in the mining sector because of that history. And in time, we came to a situation where roughly 10% of every mine has to be owned by the state. It's not that, except in the case of bauxite and a few others. I think in industrial minerals, a different regime prevails. But certainly in gold, roughly 10% equity is the current situation. So the government automatically, because the minerals are vested in the president in trust for the people, if you are given a lease, the entity that you put together to mine the gold, 10% of that entity has to be owned by the state. Of course, like everything in Ghana and perhaps everything in the world, there are strange exceptions. So we know that somebody decided to have a very interesting arrangement with Ashanti Gold, where we were told we needed to get our shares in the parent company instead of the local company. And that was somehow beneficial to the country. Unfortunately, it was not the case. And now we have, 0.01% or something in Ashanti Gold International. And when you do the analysis, you come to the conclusion that we were making more from the combination of royalties and share of bullion from Ashanti Gold in the mid-90s, maybe 5 to 7 times more in the mid-90s than what we are making today. So we have a history of abject mismanagement of mineral resources in this country. A lot of the decisions that have been made are pathetic, to be extremely charitable. So in that context, the question then arises of the different types of returns from minerals that the state is entitled to. Rents, royalties, dividends through ownership of equity and the rest. Which one requires innovation? Royalties are fairly simple. Regardless of whether or not the mine makes a profit, we get our money. It's between 3% and 5%. And that scale itself was imposed on national policy by the mines and their lobbyists. However, that is the current situation. If the price of gold is bad, we reduce the royalty. If the price of gold goes above $1,700, we hit the 5% bar. In times of good good pricing, 5% is a sensible number to use. So 5% of all the gold produced, right, it's royalty. Of course, there are some that argue that even royalties can be manipulated in different ways, and therefore we should go to rents. That's a different debate. I'm not going to go into that. But of all the categories of income that we can get from minerals, the one that is most immune to transfer mispricing, which is where the company that is supposed to pay various amounts to the government find ways to shift their highly costly activities to the Ghanaian entity and shift the less costly activities overseas so that they appear to be making a loss locally, while through their international structures, they're actually making money. Royalties is much more immune because we say whether or not you are making profit or not, give us our 5%. So if you want to maximize royalty intake, your proper behavior should be how you spend the money. It's as simple as that. On the other hand, we've now got to a situation where of all the minerals, that money that comes from minerals, maybe 90% or more increasing are just from royalties. Which then raises the question of this 10% equity we hold in companies, why are they not paying the dividends? So if there is a thorny problem to solve in minerals, it is that segment, the issue of how we maximize the returns to equity. And the arguments that have been made over a number of times have included the creating of a super company or super vehicle that has the maxil to make sure that representation in terms of board roles and things like that are stronger. So that the government, for instance, is able to exert within these companies enough management pressure to ensure that we get paid. There are issues to do with, obviously, poor auditing. So I was just recently being told that if you go to the mines and you have these GRA officers that are supposed to make sure that their activities are properly auditable, some of them have been at the same mine for 13 years. And there are instances where it's quite clear that some of these people that are supposed to make sure that the volumes of gold that are being produced are properly audited, have no clue what they are doing, they're highly under-incentivized, their systems are not there. So we have big problems when it comes to auditability of how much gold is being produced and the costs.
Or they may be compromised.
That's a possibility. Then you have a situation also where when you look at the cost structure of gold, it becomes very difficult at that theoretical level to suggest any improvement because sometimes shareholders are getting 1.5% and they are disclosing costs that suggest that maybe 60-something% of all costs are being spent in the country. So you look like, okay, maybe we are making enough already. Until you have to dig deep into it, then you realize that in actual fact, a lot of the purchases that are purported to be local are not sufficiently local in the way that they impact local value chains and things like that. So when you look at all of those things, we need increased presence in terms of management decision making in these mines. And a super vehicle might be able to attract the right people to do those things. In simple terms, royalties is not the place to look because royalties are sufficiently risk-free that there isn't need for additional engineering of royalties. Where we have a problem is those places where we have 10% of a mine and we've not made money for many, many, many years. Look at bauxite. We discovered, for instance, that Bosai, consistently say the operation is unprofitable and there's nothing you can do about it. They just simply say, well, they mine the bauxite, they don't make any money. So the 20% or so that we have in the bauxite regime is meaningless because they just claim they don't make money.
But is there not a difference? Here we are putting the royalties into a vehicle, a company, and hoping that this company will turn that money over and give us profit?
Okay, in that regard, if you think it's the $300 million that you can reinvest better, you have a MIF. You've changed the law in the MIF, which enables the MIF to set up an SPV, right? Today, without a JAPA, the MIF can set up a local SPV and say, what I want to put the $300 million a year that we get in gold is this. Let's discuss it. Because I'll make more money from this, and that. There's no need for any convoluted structure because we know that money is fairly certain.
Okay.
The question that arises where you need innovative thinking is where the money appears not to be coming. You seem to have an asset. It's a liquid asset, right? Where we do financial engineering and financial innovation is where you have an illiquid asset and you want to make it more liquid.
Okay.
Not when you have a very liquid asset and you now want to go and turn it into a more speculative asset. I don't understand that logic.
Thank you very much. And I have to welcome Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD Ghana. He will shortly tell us of an area of what has happened that he seems to want to advocate, that perhaps we should begin this process of subjecting major contracts and deals by the state to a corruption risk analysis. Hi, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh.
Good morning, Samson.
Great to have you. So we'll come to you shortly. And also joining us is Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba, who is Senior Lecturer, University of Ghana Law School. Thanks for joining us, Doc.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Great. Now, Dr. Graham, last week you ended on this note. You said that, bottom line, that the giveaway terms, the poor evaluation, exclusion of public supervision, surrender of sovereignty, secrecy, opacity of being in a tax haven. So you simply quoted back to us what Amidu has said in the report. I take it again. The giveaway terms, the poor evaluation, the exclusion of public supervision, surrender of sovereignty, the secrecy, the opacity of the company being in a tax haven. None of those are cured by the President's directive to return the deal to Parliament. It is barred from conception. It is dead in the water. That's it? We ended there?
No, we don't end it there. And just to modify your thing a little bit, those things that I said was in a way the summary
of
what many people have said about the JAPA deal. Some of the things that Bright just said, for example, fall into that same space. So the OSP report agreed with what people have been saying. That is an important part of its strength. Because somebody can accuse me of, say, don't mind this leftist. Okay? The OSP office is a public office set up by the state as an independent entity. The OSP report agrees with what the whole range of citizenry have been saying. And that is important because, you see, that thing connects back to something which gets lost. The public ownership, the common ownership of our non-renewable resources by the citizens of Ghana, and the responsibility of government as a trustee for managing those things properly for us as the beneficial owners, which in practice has become executive control and ownership. And we are simply supposed to go along with whatever decision they make. That issue has been put very much sharply in view by this. And it's been in view in many ways. Some of the things talked about, for example, about the abject management, there are many aspects of it. Okay? So I'm simply repeating the fact that given this consensus which has emerged, including in the OSP's report, really, if the president is acting as a proper trustee for the beneficial owners who are the people of this country, we can't proceed. Even with this thing, it is not in the interest of the people of this country. That's the consensus. I've not heard anybody outside die-hard loyalists or people close to the deal coming out to defend it. The points made also about the role of Parliament, which goes again to a failure of oversight on behalf of the people, adds to this thing about a kind of political elite consensus about managing our resources. In this case, actually, primarily not even in their own interest. In general, foreign companies and their shareholders have been the main beneficiaries of our resources. And one of the things which has been clear since the commodities boom is how all the contracts that have been signed across the continent, their terms are so poor that we don't even get the returns that we should be getting. Okay, and the point is Brian made of how that, I mean, we don't need a speculative vehicle for managing our royalty. So you say, just confirm those things.
You say it is barred from conception.
Yes.
It is dead in the water.
Yes.
The president's directive is that after he had seen the report, he also asked the finance minister to also bring his response, which is a confidential memo. And he said the president has authorized to be made public that report, also the memorandum, to contribute to the national discourse on the matter, meaning there is supposed to be further discourse to contribute to the national discourse on the matter. He commended the special prosecutor. Then he says he welcomes this novelty of institutionalizing the risk of corruption and anti-corruption risk assessment, and wholly welcomes it as an important preventive weapon in the fight against corruption. He has instructed the minister that in the interest of transparency and accountability to the Ghanaian people, the agreements supporting the transaction that were submitted to Parliament and approved by the House should be resubmitted to Parliament for the approval process to start all over again. You say what? This shouldn't happen?
No, I'm saying that that proposal by the president really doesn't stand up if in the context of the totality of the conclusions of the OSP report. It doesn't stand up in the face of the consensus that the OSP report finds with all the technical, economic, process criticisms that have been made of the JAPA deal. So if the president is acting in the interest of the beneficial owners of this resource, why does he want to persist with something which has been found to be flawed in so many aspects? So even though the president has directed, it is our right and responsibility, first as the beneficial owners, the citizens, okay, and also also who have an interest in this case, to analyze the president's reaction, to find out whether really it's a reaction which has legs. He may have the power to direct. That's his power. But it is possible to conclude that the president's proposals don't have legs in the light of everything that has been said.
The CSOs, particularly those in the extractive industry, where that's your comfort zone. Martin Amidu says you are such a key stakeholder. You have complained earlier about secrecy, opacity, and lack of consultation. What else do you want the president to do? He says, let's allow the opportunity. Let's start afresh. You have complained about procurement issues. He says that he has directed that the procurement of the services of the transaction advisor or advisors should also be reviewed by the Ministry of Finance and the Attorney General with the aim of taking all steps that may be necessary to remove any doubts about the integrity of the process. And then these are his expectations, that the transaction advisors, together with the Ministry of Finance and the Minerals and Investment Fund, will use this opportunity to also amend the relevant agreements to take into account the useful feedback received during the series of stakeholder consultations over the last months. What else do you want the president to do?
Samson, if you take the totality of the president's comments, what is going back to Parliament? That's the point.
Everything.
No, but it means that there's a whole range of things which have to be done afresh. If you take the totality of the president's comments, to accept that this thing is so flawed, and the only conclusion that he could come to without losing face, or not, let me put it this way, to avoid losing face, he doesn't come to the only obvious conclusion that can come from even the proposal that he said. Because proposals, in a way, are accepting that all the criticisms that have been made are substantial. And the CSO thing is not simply a process criticism. The process criticism fits into the substantive criticism about the merits of the Ijapa deal. Its merits, not simply because certain things were not done, but its merits. And the questioning of the merits have been expressed in different ways by different people, whether it's about the valuation, whether it's about tax haven, whether it's about opacity, whether it's all kinds of things. The president is saying, take on board all these things. What is left then of the Ijapa deal? The conclusion, which he's unable to draw, understandably, because it is his government which has put this thing forward, is that this thing really, it doesn't measure up. It does not measure up.
The finance minister was on this platform. Yes. I asked him the question, yes, what was going to happen to it. He said, there's no going back.
But he, of course, he would persist, because they are the drivers of this deal. They are the drivers of this deal. And this is one of the unfortunate problems of our politics.
Right.
A refusal to admit that we are wrong, and a persistence in using power in a way that even if it's not in the interest of the country. Because the beneficiaries of that deal, ultimately, we know from everything that's been said, will not be primarily the people of this country, but some other entities, known and unknown, politically connected or not.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let me go to Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, and once we are done with him, we'll have Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba also share with us from where he sits as a lawyer. Both the NDC and the CSOs are calling for first, and I understand, let me correct myself, earlier I said it was the NDC asking for investigations before prosecution, but the CSOs were asking straight away for prosecution. The CSOs are also asking for investigations before prosecution. So he will tell us whether or not that sits well with the mandate of the special prosecutor as presently, activated to do this process on the back of what Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh is advocating for. Now, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, the special prosecutor in the last but one paragraph of the report says that this analysis of risk of corruption and anti-corruption assessment was undertaken pursuant to Section 2C. We know that Section 2C of the OSP Act gives the OSP a three-tier mandate. The mandate number one is to prosecute, investigate, and prosecute corruption. Mandate number two is to recover. And mandate number three is prevention of corruption, which is a novelty, so that we know that you guys were very happy and excited about this other leg of the mandate, so that we don't get the money stolen or dissipated and then we chase after the wind. He says, and Section 4, 29, 26, and 73 of the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act and Regulation 31 of the Office of the Special Prosecutor Operations Regulations, and in fulfillment of the mandate of the office to undertake measures to prevent corruption, which includes the analysis of the risk of corruption, anti-corruption assessment of legislation and draft legislation, publicizing detected acts of corruption, identifying deficiencies in administration of instructions, regulations and procedure, and individual interest, including greed, lack of ethicalness, and legal awareness, among others. This office accordingly hopes that the foregoing analysis of the risk of corruption and anti-corruption assessment of the processes leading up to the parliamentary approval of the transaction documents will be reviewed in good faith and used to improve current and future legislative and executive actions to make corruption and corruption-related offenses very high-risk enterprise in Ghana. You commend this, and you say we need to think about subjecting major deals like this to such a process before we undertake it. Can you explain your position?
Sure. Thank you, Samson, for the opportunity. So I think historically, certainly in the Fourth Republic, or when we have had constitutional government, we have put all of our anti-corruption eggs in one basket, which is the prosecution basket. So we have spent, resources on prosecutorial bodies and various law enforcement agencies, where the whole purpose of fighting corruption has been to detect it, investigate it, charge culprits if you can find them, gather evidence, launch prosecution, and hopefully get a conviction. If you look historically at the returns on that kind of investment, certainly in Ghana, no one has to really tell you that we've had very little payoff from that approach to fighting corruption. And there are a number of reasons for that. It's really, there are so many steps along the way, not all of which is controlled by one entity. So who does the investigation, the detection often is different from the prosecutor, who does the charging, the police. So there are many, many different entities along the line. And of course, it ends up in the judiciary, which is also not within the control. So at any one point, somebody can drop the ball. And the processes are also somewhat politically mediated at different points. Even if you have a different OSP, you have the police, that's different. You have investigators, you have all of that. And then you have the judiciary. So essentially, we haven't really had a good return on our investment from that approach to fighting corruption. And so a number of us have advocated, that we really need to just expand the number of tools in our toolkit for fighting corruption. And rather than fight corruption in a backward-looking way, which is the way we've been doing it, wait for the corruption to happen and then go try and unravel it and find it out. We should also be trying to prevent corruption. And I think this tool comes in handy. The reason I like it, and I think the reason a number of us like it, it has an analogy or precedent in the environmental impact assessments, or the idea of environmental risk assessments. The idea that before, normally, unless, you really attend to the environment, give it real focus or attention, one is unlikely to factor it into one's thinking when one is undertaking a project. So the idea of an environmental risk assessment is to force decision makers to actually think about how a proposed project will impact the environment in multiple ways, the ecology, the community, all of those things. And then to issue a report, do an assessment, and if the proposal does not pass a certain test, then you don't proceed with it. Or if the risk to the environment can be mitigated in a cost-efficient way, then those mitigation factors are then recommended, and then you can proceed only on condition you mitigate those factors. So that's the idea. And I think importing that idea into the corruption area is brilliant. It means that we don't have to wait for the house to burn down before we put a fire extinguisher in it. When a deal is proposed, or even when a piece of legislation, in fact, sometimes proposed constitutions have even been subjected to a corruption risk analysis. Because corruption, though we think of it as a crime, and that is where the prosecutorial stuff comes in, it's also, in a sense, a crime of opportunity. If there are ample opportunities created within a deal, within legislation, within a particular kind of proposal for corruption to occur, then the likelihood that corruption will occur is actually high, very high. So the idea here is that before you proceed with the project, before you proceed with a deal, before you proceed with even the law, you have an independent assessment of all the various ways in which corruption can enter into the deal. So all the possible entry points, all the opportunities that are created in the deal for corruption to happen would then be looked at, and then a proposal will be made as to how those loopholes, those entry points, those possible leakages, those possible opportunities may be mitigated or closed. And a report then would form the basis upon which we will proceed or not proceed with the action. So it looks very much like we do with an environmental impact statement. I think the idea here is a brilliant one. And as you've actually mentioned, it falls within the mandate of the OSP. In fact, I think basically, we should probably spend more time on this part of the OSP's mandate than possibly on the prosecutorial part, because a lot of corruption is difficult to detect. Corruption is not something that happens with eyewitnesses present, except usually the participants.
That's right.
Who have every incentive to make it not come public, right? So really, the idea that you really are going to get a lot of corruption cases detected, it's actually, it's fanciful. Yeah. A lot of corruption will go undetected because it is not an activity that happens in the glare of the public. So in my view, we should be spending more of our resources on preventative tools. And this one, I think, is a brilliant one. The problem, though, is that I think, the OSP going this way is brilliant. However, I think prior to going this way, what I would have loved to see is a template developed that shows how it is, right? Like a form, a proper template with, different, disaggregated into its various parts, explaining exactly how this corruption risk assessment would look like, how it's going to be done, and so that there is clarity in advance on how the process works. So I think that, maybe this is just, the way it started, but I would prefer that we actually go back and develop a proper template that is actually, we all know it, it's publicized.
Beyond the template, Professor Kwesi Prempeh, beyond the template, yes. There are those who say, you see that this is the hand of the OSP himself, writing and using language that many media persons are even unable to decipher and therefore are not able to follow what is going on. Many people are attempting to read, and some have told me, even lawyers have told me how difficult it is for them to read it. You must be really determined to read this 64-page document before you can actually read it. And so the professional outlook doesn't come out that clean. He says his office is too small. He can't even employ people in there to work. Should we be looking at hiring accounts people, auditing personnel, staffing this particular section of that department of his office to do this work and do it well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not a one profession kind of job. It is by its very nature interdisciplinary. Depending on the nature of the deal, you need to bring in a lot of other professionals, whether on staff or on a consulting basis. But you definitely do need to have a whole array of professionals who would look at this. Certainly accountants, certainly people who understand the finance world, depending on the deal that's at stake. And like I said, it's not just deals, it's even legislation. So it's not just a lawyerly task. And I think part of the difficulty people are having with the report, if you had a template, a predetermined, published template, then the discussion would be a lot more disciplined. It would be more systematic. The analysis would follow a more orderly pattern, a more systematic pattern, and then you could actually use it to greater profit. So I think part of the difficulty that many are having with the content of the report, it's the absence of this pre-organization or this template that would assist us to follow this in a systematic manner. So I think that basically that's what is lacking, and that's what we need to go back and do. I don't see this. It is not, so maybe this is where I have difficulty, because when you don't do it that way, it also, then people can't tell. If it reads through too loyally, it might look like, well, then go ahead and prosecute. I don't see this as a prosecution docket. It's not a docket for prosecution as such. What it is an assessment of the risk, the various sources of risk within a transaction, and how those sources of risk arose or have arisen, where those sources lie, and how we might mitigate them, if possible, to let the deal proceed. And if not, if they are so fundamentally flawed in the design, then you say, no, the deal cannot proceed on that basis.
Right. So you just
virtue of this arrangement, and I think it would be to our benefit as a country if we could institutionalize it and make sure not just the OSP to do it, but actually mainstream it. This should be mainstreamed within MDAs, so that within each organization, the same way we would do for maybe like gender mainstreaming or for mainstreaming any idea that is good, yet if left unattended to, left without particular focus, will not get done. Right. So I consider this the same way we should be mainstreaming gender, the same way we should be mainstreaming environmental assessments. We should mainstream anti-corruption. It doesn't become the job of only the OSP. OSP might have ultimate oversight at some point, but the G could do that. It depends themselves.
Right.
That's how people.
So you just preempted my final question, but this is another part of that question. The first part of that question was about why people should be subjecting themselves to such a process when an assessment, as you say, is not intended for prosecution, will now open people up to criticism and all sorts of issues and calls for prosecution. What do you say to critics that will say this will be adding yet another bureaucracy to a layer of bureaucracy to the processes of procurement? As in, if you take away assessment of legislation and other things aside, and you are going to stall procurement. We already have procurement processes, we have procurement entities in every organization, and we are going to go through another process of having a corruption risk analysis. So what class of contracts or projects should go through this process?
Sure. I mean, it's not all procurement. I mean, not all bureaucracy is bad. If bureaucracy was bad inherently or ab initio, we would not have bureaucracy. I mean, there is good reason to have bureaucracy, and if it's cost justified, the issue is what is at stake here is what we have to look at. We are hemorrhaging huge resources, not just through corruption, through waste, through lack of diligence, and many other such omissions and acts of commissions. And so I don't think it is a good enough response to say that this is going to add to the layer of corruption. The question is, what benefit are we going to get out of it? What's the payoff? What's the return on investment? And I think that given the way where the country loses money through of diligence, through corruption, through waste, this is money, this is time well spent. If we're going to spend a little bit more time to get more diligent so that we identify the sources of conflicts of interest likely to lead to corruption. We identify lapses in procurement that are likely to invite corruption. We identify these things. We identify discretion that is so unbounded that, in fact, there's almost a formula for this. There's something that's been developed like, corruption happens when there's a lack of transparency, there's too much discretion, there's monopoly of power. all of these things are there. You can actually break them down and analyze them that way.
All right.
I don't think it's a good enough response, given where we are as a country, to say that this will add to the layer of bureaucracy. There are a lot of layers of bureaucracy we don't need.
All right.
This is not one of them. This is a useful one. And to the last point is, yes, we need to sit down and identify the thresholds. What's an appropriate threshold to set for when we have to do this kind of a deal?
Okay.
Of course, you have to be also mindful of the fact that sometimes if you set, people can play tricks with these things. You can set a threshold and say 5 million, transaction above 1 million. And then you might have somebody break the same transaction down into 5 small.
Professor Prempeh, you know what you just reminded me of? The National Lotteries procurement, the Rams Kitchen procurement matter, where because the threshold is 100,000, and he broke down the contracts into, if you like, 99 up to 11 separate contracts.
Yes. This will happen. And it happens in many other places. I mean, you look, when you set thresholds, you have to take these things into account.
Okay.
So let's have to step back, be systematic about it, not rush it, but use this as an opportunity to start a real conversation about what additional tools that in our toolkits to fight corruption. It's not always about prosecution.
Okay.
The prosecution, in my view, is too after the fact, and our record on it in terms of success is too poor.
Right.
To put too much eggs in that basket.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, for your time with us this morning.
Welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh is the Executive Director of the CDD Ghana. Of course, you have known him as an anti-corruption crusader, also good governance, analyst or advocate, and a constitutional lawyer as well. Also, that is his point there, very instructive for all of us. Now we are going to Dr. Bamba on the question of prosecute, or investigate and prosecute. He'll give us a legal perspective. But before we do that, let's have Bright and Dr. Yao Graham give us their brief, a comment on the back of the proposal or the advocacy as started by Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, and I've seen Dr. Theo Champong, Professor Kweku Asare, all supporting that this is a good thing, so that we preempt and not wait for the money to be lost and then we go chasing after it. We don't find it. You jail a person, you have jailed an individual, the money is gone. Yes.
No, I mean, Professor Prempeh is very usually thoughtful and comprehensive views on these matters, always has my respect. However, I'm concerned about whether or not the good faith aspect of these bureaucratic and political actions make any technical solution possible. I've been doing this now for a decade and a half, and I'm slowly coming to the conclusion that where the value system is so broken to the point where people don't set out making a good faith effort to comply, it becomes almost impossible to use technical means. If we look at and I don't know whether this is where you want me to validate my points, you want to go around and come back again, but if you look at what has happened in the Japa transaction, it is quite clear that someone very skilled had set out to circumvent the process, without doubt. And I am not sure that any technical measures, so to speak, will have been enough. If we had, as part of the framework for large transactions in this country involving the public sector, a preventive mechanism as advocated very eloquently by Professor Prempeh, my view is that they will have set up certain other mechanisms to override it. Okay. Now let me give an example. When a Japa started, and this point is not clear to many people, so I think you need to give me a little time to explain it because it's quite germane. When a Japa started, it started off because the government claimed that received unsolicited proposals over a certain period of time, pushing a very specific type of transaction. You have some gold coming in the future, we have money. Because the nature of these things is such that the price of gold fluctuates, the income has volatility. And in finance, wherever there is volatility, there's opportunity for profits. So because we see this volatility and we have a higher risk appetite than you do, we will give you the money up front and benefit from the potential upswing. So let's say over the next 10 years, the gold that is going to come to you, you predict is $1 billion. We predict it's $300 million. That creates room for a $300 million upside. That is the nature of finance. So we will give you some money up front and we'll do this deal. The government then says about asking the Public Procurement Authority for permission to go ahead on any 6th October letter. Subsequently, the Public Procurement Authority writes to the government asking it for it to give it a list of names, when in fact, in its 6th October letter, it had already provided names. The government then submit a new set of names, and in between, in two pieces of correspondence in November, two things happened. The government placed the transaction into technical and financial. Some group is supposed to provide financial proposals. Another person or entity is supposed to provide a technical opinion on how to go forward. Somehow down the line, the initial decision to do a receivable-backed transaction or a securitization somehow disappears from the record. And now we have one situation where you have the government insist on some kind of local content provision, not in the Public Procurement Act, but which is not necessarily bad, and which will have happened post any corruption preventive assessment. Now, subsequently, they decide to then use this as a mechanism, give 17 days to potential respondents, which then bars 6 out of the 8 shortlisted entities from participating. And of the 2 that participate, they submit their responses on 8th January. So 17th December, we write to them and say, send in your details. 8th January, 2 of them respond. On 12th January, the bids are open. What is fascinating is that on that 12th of January, a technical report is written and signed. You understand what I'm saying? So 8th January, they present their responses to the RFP. On 12th January, the technical committee sits. And on 12th January, for something as momentous and as important as monetizing future gold royalties into perpetuity, they proceed to approve, or rather to make a decision between Morgan Stanley and Imara the same day as it's opened. So the technical report is dated the same 12th of January that they opened the bids. What is more fascinating is that they make it quite clear, and I've checked and subsequently found it to be true, that this Imara corporate finance entity in Johannesburg, which is the one that actually submitted the bid, has only one person on its staff with true relevant experience. And somehow, it purports to have decided that this company is superior to Morgan Stanley, which more or less invented the first model for financial analysis in the world.
You spoke about subcontracting again to Morgan Stanley.
No, but this is different from the subcontract. That was JP Morgan.
All right. Yeah, JP Morgan, okay.
So my point is, if good faith does not exist upfront, we will have difficulty continuing to invent more technical solutions. What is my alternative proposal then? I think we should go ahead definitely and implement more preventive steps.
Okay.
But at the same time, this country has to decide whether or not it wants to empower non-state actors to be more effective in playing a vigilance role. I bet you, without the vigilance of civil society, the opposition, and the rest of it, no technical measure, no bureaucracy, no mechanism will have stopped this.
Okay.
At least.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. And that's the sad commentary about our parliaments. And our parliaments over the years continue to disappoint everybody. We go shopping in saloons, we go shopping in non-existing places, and we have all sorts of bad deals on our hands. And yet when they get criticized for not doing the due diligence that they are put there to do, but rather doing blind political loyalty, rubber stamping things, they get disturbed. But you know what? This is our job. I have stopped doing the conveyor belt journalism long ago. If I have to continue to sit here, I'll do a journalism that is not conveyor belt journalism. Yes, so what would you say, what Prof. Kwesi Prempeh is proposing? And you see, he also talks about the fact that even when you do, people will find ways. So we should find threshold. And I was laughing about the threshold for public procurement and the story that came up about the national lotteries, where the chief executive had gotten his in-law to get a particular contract, but which if he had given it one go, it will not be qualified. So we had to break it down to 11 different, slots to give to her.
I mean, I think the Kwesi Prempeh's proposal, there's nothing to dispute about it. I want to pick some of the things that Bright has said. Interestingly, Bright, where you landed shows what a preventive thing can contribute. Because the things that you spoke about, those steps, that the way the deal shifted and this objective shifted, the qualities and so on. One of the things that the OSP report helps us to understand the maneuvers. So the stronger effectiveness of non-state actors definitely will be helped by these kinds of mechanisms.
But at what point will that preventive examination have been done?
No, let me come. I mean, there are many things many lessons about institutions and process that we can draw from the OSP report and what should be done, what can be done, what will be some of the challenges with using certain approaches. So that's what I'm trying to build.
But that was done midstream.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm saying that but the preventive, the thing, so where in the sequence should certain things be done?
Exactly.
That's very important.
Okay.
And
we are fortunate to have passed a law in which we have introduced a novelty that instead of fighting corruption always after the act, after the event, let's be proactive and prevent it rather than allow it to happen.
So we are talking about how to improve the prevention.
Exactly.
I think that's what Kwesi's thing.
Yes.
Bryce's thing is that there are some other factors which affect the effectiveness of the prevention. I don't think we can dispute that. But the point I'm making is that those factors are part of the political ecosystem. You make the point that non-state actors can reinforce the preventive thing. And I'm saying certain mechanisms, access to information early enough, those things can improve the quality of the prevention. And on the point about who trying to get around it, it is also possible, just like when they do an audit, something can look a particular way, but you can say, listen, this thing is not credible, and so on. So, but you put your finger on the thing that technical solutions alone are not enough. But I think we can also agree that the technical, institutional things and improved processes would help limit the possibilities. People continue to try to be clever and so on. But I also said that because this discussion really goes to the issue of when we talk about the state as a public factor, as something in the public interest, we are talking about its effectiveness, its efficiency, and its capabilities. And I think this thing about these mechanisms and so on, given what we know about the abuse of public office, which is increasingly in Ghana deemed to be one of the benefits of public office. We need to be able to do the things that don't make the thing a kind of post facto chase after, corrupt returns.
Okay.
And the other thing also, which has been a major part of the discussion, is how do we improve, say, for example, the openness of the contracting process? So you combine a number of different things, and then it kind of makes it more difficult for people to do certain things. Just a last point about the prosecution. I mean, the point about the prosecution which was made by the CSOs is not an either-or thing. In fact, it is because the report itself talks about things which have gone wrong. So they were trying to make a risk assessment, but in the process, the SP report comes to some conclusion that some things may have gone wrong already, which could be the basis for further, investigating and prosecuting. So if you look on page 22, 23, for example, the report says, let me read, this analysis of the risk of corruption and anti-corruption assessment of legislation and identified deficiencies in regulations and instructions and blah, 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 blah. It is therefore not intended to include any detailed analysis and assessment of those payments. It's referring to some payments that have been made. In this report, because of their nature, the proper place to deal with them is when these assessments give rise to a decision to open full investigations into the transaction documents for suspected corruption and corruption-related offenses.
Thank you. Dr. Abdul Basit, Aziz Basit Bamba, thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. So we'll deal with you, we'll have you deal with this question of the calls and demands for investigation and prosecution, and then we'll take a break to return to deal with the question of the OSP identifying, as he says, former President Mahama as government official 1 and stopping there literally and claiming that he has bought himself an insurance by being the flag bearer of the NDC, and therefore nothing can go on. Some people are really livid that you cannot make that claim, and that it's actually inconsistent with his own statements, because he says that crime should not have any color and so on and so forth, and yet he claims that he's found somebody to be committing a crime and yet does not intend to take any further step or will only take a step until something else has happened. Do we have Dr. Bamba on the line? Great, great. So the civil society group, which is made of, a coalition of groups in the extractive industry, did a press conference and said a number of things. I'm sure we can hear Dr. Steve Manteyao briefly on that. And then the NDC also had a few things to say about prosecution. Then we'll have you address the legal question on that.
While we commend the President for acting on the report, we hold the view that the specific course of action directed by the President is inadequate and not sustainable. A proper reading of the report of the OSP should lead to 2 conclusions. 1, that the deal is defective beyond repair. 2, that there are potential breaches of various laws, Public Procurement Act and the Public Financial Management Act. Furthermore, the range of steps that the President has asked the Minister of Finance to take to repair the defects in the Japan transaction objectively amount to there being deep-seated fundamental flaws. Whether we support the call for the dismissal of the Finance Minister, I would like to refer you to the statement that I've just read, which encourages a special prosecutor to go the next level of properly investigating the matter and indicting all those officials who may have been implicated in any wrongdoing and maybe taking them through the court processes. It is only when a court of competent jurisdiction has found them guilty that we can now, on the basis of that ruling, begin to call for certain actions. That has to do with the reference to the Airbus scandal in the Ejapa report. That was unfortunate. We would have wished that hadn't happened. It takes the shine of the report. Perhaps the special prosecutor could have avoided that.
Right. So Steve Manteyao spoke, Dr. Steve Manteyao spoke for the CSOs in the extractive industry who came together and who have from, the inception been speaking up very, loudly about aspects of the deal that they are against. So the NDC also joined, issued a press release, and actually it was read also by Dr. Johnson Esiedu-Nketia, the General Secretary. The 5-page press release, among others, says that the Special Prosecutor's report has just confirmed and I read just a portion. They say it's a clear case of a nepotistic thievery, and then say that the NDC and several patriotic civil society organizations such as Imani, ISODEC, PIAC, ASEPA, the Ghana Integrity Initiative, IDEG, and the Coalition of CSOs on the Extractive Sector, among several others, have long maintained that the Ejapa deal is a bad deal for Ghana, and that it was only a matter of time for the stench from this criminal enterprise called Ejapa to become obvious to all. They called it or labeled it daylight robbery. They labeled it a scam. They said it was in furtherance of the thing of state capture, the agenda of state capture that they have accused the Akufo-Addo administration of, that it vindicates the minorities' boycott of the approval of the deal, and the NDC's promise that if it's had the opportunity of being returned to power in the elections, it will abrogate the whole thing. Now, it ended by threatening series of actions, including suits and protests, if, as it says, and I read in paragraph 12 of their statement, the OSP must conduct criminal investigations into this matter and ensure that anyone who directly or indirectly played a role in the Ejapa scam faces the full rigors of the law. And then concludes by saying, they hereby demand that President Akufo-Addo retrieves for the state the billions of cedis his government has illegally paid under the shady Ejapa deal to data bank. Billions of cedis. Okay, I'll need someone to help us here. And Bright, take note of this. Have we spent billions of cedis on this already? A deal to Ejapa, to data bank, which is owned by his cousin and finance minister Kenneth Oriata, Africa Legal Associates, which is owned by another cousin of his, Gabi Asare-Dako, and their foreign compradors. Within the next 7 days, failing which the NDC and other like-minded progressive forces shall embark on a series of protests and legal actions to ensure that every peswa paid to these companies are refunded back to the state for nation building. Dr. Bassett, investigate and prosecute. How do we proceed in this way in a corruption risk assessment, which is a novel and very good thing to prevent corruption, and we are in a hurry to call for investigation and prosecution, and yet we think this is very good going into the future in government procurements of significant, which involves significant national resources?
Thank you so much, Thompson. Before I answer your question directly, it's important, perhaps maybe I refer to our Constitution, particularly Article 35(8), which makes it very clear that the state has a duty and must take steps to eradicate corruption. Now, Constitution makes so many references to corruption. Apart from Article 35(8), a reference to corruption, a greater part of the mandate of SHRAD is also focused on corruption. And if you look at our country, since it's founded in 1957, corruption has been one of the major impediments to our development. And we have tried many institutional forms to fight corruption, but so far we seem not to have succeeded. I'll be very brief. Historically, we attempted using just the police to fight corruption. In the 60s, we realized that that wasn't working because there was total lack of faith in the police service. And we passed a law called the Corruption Prevention Act. What we did under this law was essentially to use the mechanism of a commission of inquiry to investigate corruption. So either allegations of corruption, we have a commission of inquiry investigating the corruption, and then when they make their findings, those findings become a prima facie case, and you, the person who has those findings against, would then have to defend yourself in a court of law. This was an institutional mechanism we used to avoid having to use the police in investigation. And then in the 1969 Constitution, we brought in the Ombudsman, which has now become both under the 1982 Constitution. So this attempt, this institutional form of the Office of the Special Prosecutor being used to fight corruption, I think is innovative and is in line with the obligation of the government, of the state, to eradicate corruption and not just to fight, to deal with corruption when acts of corruption have already taken place. And some lawyers nowadays, we tend to focus more on preventative lawyering. We don't do curative lawyering. Our focus is trying to prevent a legal breach from taking place, with legal consequences following.
That's right.
Instead of waiting for something to happen before we try to find a legal solution. Now, having said that, now the call by civil society for investigation and prosecution is there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually in line with the constitutional obligation of all citizens, including civil society, to fight towards the eradication of corruption. But in order to appreciate this call, I think it is important, perhaps, I try to maybe highlight what I consider to be the key findings of this report. I must say, Honorable Masanamidu has a style of writing, which reminds me of the English judge of Depok, where there's use of very compound and complex sentences. So it takes quite a bit of effort to sometimes understand exactly the point that is made. Perhaps if there was an executive summary with the key findings of the big, it would have helped a lot. But in very simple terms, I see this report to be raising essentially four main things. One is about the processes leading to the approval of the jeopardy. It is clear that certain organizations or certain companies that initially were not part of the process were included subsequently. Now, the second major finding that I see from this report is that there appear to be certain clear breaches of constitutional provisions and statutory provisions. Masanamidu talks about Article 1815. That some of the transactions, in fact, are international business transactions and by constitutional imperative should have been approved by Parliament. They don't seem to have been approved by Parliament. He also talks about statutory breaches, possible breaches of Public Procurement Act as well as the Public Financial Management Act, and then talks about bid rigging and all. Now, what is the legal status of this report? I think we need to understand that this report is not making definitive findings of wrongdoing. That is not the focus and purpose of this report. Its purpose essentially is to do an assessment and bring out possible areas that could be prone to corruption or could lead to corrupt acts being committed, right? So I think the call by civil society and also by the NDC for prosecution, for investigation and prosecution is in order. Because it seems to me a careful reading of this report indicates that at least parts of the findings pass a smell test, in the sense that they appear to give a very reasonable basis of probable cause for further investigation. So, for example, if our money has already been paid to Imara and all, and it appears there was something wrong with the procurement process, then definitely we should be interested in finding out exactly what happened and establishing conclusively whether or not there have been breaches, and if so, what the consequences of the breaches should be.
If the purpose is for prevention by way of curative, what's the point of further investigations and prosecution? And do I understand further investigation and prosecution to mean that this report cannot be used to prosecute?
No, I don't get the sense that this report can be used to prosecute, definitely. Before you can use a report to prosecute, usually the investigating process for prosecution requires certain processes. For example, the suspects have to be given the chance to respond to whatever allegations against them. If after the investigation you feel that there's a case for them to answer, you have to caution them, where you tell them that you are charging them with this offense, they can keep quiet or rely on their previous statements and all. So this report doesn't partake of any of those processes. But to answer your question directly about whether or not this report should be used as a base for further prosecution, I think doing so is consistent with the functions of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Now, when you look at Section 3 of the Office of Special Prosecutor Act, it is very, very clear that the role or the mandate of the office includes investigating and prosecuting. Investigating and prosecuting. Because, I mean, what would be the purpose of doing a corruption risk assessment if what we do is, as we did in the past, the report just gathers that? You know, so once there is a basis, once there is a probable cause, once there is some evidence that suggests that a certain illegality may well have been committed, I think the call for a further investigation and prosecution is ignored. I don't agree with this view that because this is a very novel mechanism that we have instituted, it might complicate further our fight against corruption if we use this report as a basis for further investigation and prosecution. I don't think so. I think it will be in line with the object of the mandate of the Office of Special Prosecutor Act, as well as Article 35(8), which calls on the state to take steps to eradicate corruption.
So he says something at the very end on page 64, which confirms what you have just, your preamble to my question, which is what you said, which constitutes, if you like, the summary of the fundamentals of criminal jurisprudence. You cannot seek to prosecute a person if you have not taken them through a prosecutorial investigations, you have not cautioned them, and also to put them on alert so that they will not self-incriminate and they will exercise their rights in Articles 14, Article 19, and so on and so forth. He says this assessment does not constitute an investigation, even though formal investigations for the suspected commission of corruption and corruption-related offenses may arise from this corruption risk assessment. It is not the work of a commission or committee of inquiry. Of course, we know that you cannot use the work of a commission or committee of inquiry to prosecute. You need fresh investigations. It is what it is, an analysis of the risk of corruption, an anti-corruption assessment of the transaction documents. It partakes in the nature of a compliance audit. Compliance audit. So if the purpose is a compliance audit, do you think that being in a hurry to call for investigation and prosecution will help what we seek to chart for the future? That we should not be going after corruption after it has occurred and so on, but we should seek to prevent it. And in seeking to prevent it, we should do a risk assessment where people should voluntarily give documents and cooperate. If at the back of my mind, I am thinking this assessment you are seeking to do, you may seek through it to prosecute me. Do you think we can achieve anything if we look at it this way, rather than a curative process, then we turn it into a process for prosecution?
Something I appreciate perhaps about the chilling effects of any calls for further investigation in having on the fight against corruption. But sometimes when you look at our history, corruption has been one of the main stumbling blocks to our national development. And whatever it is that we have to do to address corruption, I think we need to do that, even if some persons might be uncomfortable with some of the steps that we have to take. As I've indicated, one of the main functions of the Office of the Special Prosecutor is investigating and prosecuting corruption and corruption-related offenses. And I think doing further investigation, and if there is a basis for prosecution, mounting a prosecution would be one of the boldest steps that we could take to give effect to the policy rationale for the establishment of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, in addition to complying with our constitutional imperatives.
Right.
We need to be, I mean, public officials sometimes always want to be given a certain unbounded discretion, often on the basis that it is true that they will be able to serve the public best. But our experience doesn't show that giving them such untrammeled, uncontrolled discretion has been our best interest. And in this regard, let me just add on also to the point made by Professor Prempeh about the need for us to streamline, to mainstream and make this one corruption audit part of perhaps our procurement process and part of any transactions that the government partakes in. And I think we can do this pretty simply. All we need to do is to come out with a comprehensive corruption risk assessment framework, as they have done in some countries. All you do is just come out with a checklist, like a checklist of about 100. So any transaction, you go through the checklist. Is it a foreign partner? Who are the shareholders? You check. Do they have a relevant experience? You check. This is something that could be done in a very simple, productive manner to check corruption. So I really think, I mean, to sum up my main submission on this, I really think that yes, the report doesn't make definitive findings of wrongdoing. It is just, as he puts it, a compliance audit. But I think there is enough information from that report that suggests possible breaches of constitutional provisions and also breaches of criminal statutes. And I think that the call for further investigation and, if need be, prosecution is justified.
All right. Dr. Bassett, we will let you hold on there. We will take a quick break. When we return, the special prosecutor says John Mahama is government official 1 in the Airbus scandal. Question remains, and so what? Is that the end of the story? And is the special prosecutor ready to admit, like some have suggested, that in some part he did a sloppy job, where he requires that the mandate agreement required, or transaction advisors thing required, the prior approval of Parliament. Was he right or wrong? We will show you why he may have been wrong. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile. It's the most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. I'm your host, Samson Ladi Nyenini. All right, so before we proceed on this final part, you clearly would have seen that as we advertised, one of our panelists was supposed to be Andrew Ejapa-Mensah, the MP Secondee and Vice Chairman, Communications Committee of Parliament. And as you have monitored so far, he's not on the show. The simple reason is that belatedly, just when this show was going on, we got information that the NPP is unable to participate because it feels the paneling is biased, unbalanced. The same complaint was made last week. They didn't feel that their own Nana Komia being on the show was sufficient. So today, that's the excuse. So if you don't hear him, that's what is going on. For those of you sharing messages and asking that, but Ejapa-Mensah was advertised and yet is not on the show, what is happening? That is the reason. I don't participate in empaneling the guests for the show, but on this particular occasion, the production got me involved to get the Attorney General or the Deputy to be on the show. And eventually, the discussions ended with Ejapa Mensah to join, because he has been studied the document so well, and if you have listened to him around, on the aspect where we asked the question whether the OSP had done a sloppy job, you will hear him read the Balkan Energy case, the Faro Atlantic case, and clearly suggest to you that the OSP was completely wrong on that note. Unfortunately, the party's communication team seem to think that their own representation is inadequate. So that is where we are. All right, we continue our show nonetheless. So let me go to Dr. Bassett, and then H. Kwesi Frempeh will join us again for this particular question, and then I'll get back to the studio. So the Office of a Special Prosecutor, if you read his report, seems to have found time at the observations point at page 53 going from paragraph 10.0. There are those who have faulted that portion as being unprofessional. And if you hear the CSOs in the extractive sector, they say that takes the shine. Now, what is that part? That part is where he brings in an Airbus matter and seeks to indict President Mahama. He goes to bring in the EO Group issue of many years ago and speaks about a $15 million matter. And he says there was a payment that was supposed to be agreed for the state, and eventually it was a payment settled into private pockets. And he seems to indict directly Mahama and Dr. Ayine, former Deputy Attorney General. And then if you read the last paragraph of page 54, he continues that exercise, and he says quite a number of things. Then he goes to applaud getting responses, as in where he was seeking information. He applauds the supply of information under this government, and when he did a certain job under the PNDC, while stating this was not the case when he was the Attorney General under the NDC. Then he cautions against use of the report for political point scoring. So questions being asked is that he was clearly doing politics in there. Does he have the right to caution anybody against doing political point scoring? Because he's clearly selective in picking certain era and bastardizing them, and rather praising the president that he has fulfilled his promise to fight corruption through his this particular office, among others. And as you know, he dared President Mahama and went ahead to issue a statement. And in this new statement, people have faulted him for using the letterhead of the OSP to issue a statement they say sounds very personal, and in engaging in a personal fight with President Mahama. Dr. Bassett, to begin with, is the OSP able to prosecute the ex-president if he has grounds to do so?
Well, if he has grounds, solid grounds after a full and complete investigation, that demonstrates that a crime has been committed. Our law permits him, subject to getting authorization of the Attorney General to mount a prosecution. So we need to remember that this whole architecture of the Office of Special Prosecutor, even though there's a great deal of focus on prosecution, without the express authorization of the Attorney General, the office holder cannot mount any prosecution of any person, because under Article 83 of the Constitution, that power is constitutionally given to the Attorney General, and Parliament cannot be seeking to delegating that power to any other institution.
I don't understand you. Are you saying, let's start and be sure with this. Are you saying that Parliament did some wrong with the OSP Act?
Well, they tried to use language which suggests an attempt to deal with a legal difficulty. So what Section 4, and if I may, seeks to do, and if I may read, it says, 4.2, subject to Clause 4 of Article 88 of the Constitution, the office shall, for the purpose of this Act, be authorized by the Attorney General to initiate and conduct the prosecution and corruption-related offences. Now, under Article 88, the power to prosecute is entirely for the Attorney General and to any other person that he may delegate that power.
Are you saying that today, as we speak, generally, the OSP cannot, on its own, so motu, take issues on and prosecute without the warrant of the Attorney General?
Reading Article 88 and Section 4.2 of the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act, that is the implication. He cannot. In fact, doing so without the authorization of the Attorney General will clearly be unconstitutional.
Really? So what's the use of this office then?
Say again.
What's the use of this office? What's the need to set it up? After all, the Attorney General wields that power in Article 88 and already has been delegating people to prosecute on its behalf.
There are the difficulties with the bill when it was put before Parliament, and clearly we've not been able to deal with this legal difficulty. And it appears the best way that they could resolve this technical legal difficulty was to put clause 4.2 in the manner that they did. But the practical effect of that clause is, regardless of whatever the office of the special prosecutor would do, without the AG's authorization, they cannot mount any prosecution.
Can you be kind enough to read Section 2 and Section 3 so that all of us will hear? I am hearing you to say that if he tried to prosecute John Mahama, it will attract, a legal action perhaps in the Supreme Court for interpretation. I'm not hearing you say that the special prosecutor has been vested the special powers, including for prosecution, on his own say-so, without recourse to Attorney General. So can you read Sections 2, 3, and perhaps if you add 4, and then we all can understand what you're saying?
So Section 2 says that the object of the office is A, to investigate and prosecute specific cases of alleged or suspected corruption and corruption-related offenses. B, recover the proceeds of corruption and corruption-related offenses. And C, take steps to prevent corruption. Then Section 3 talks about the 3.1a. To achieve the object, the office shall A, investigate and prosecute cases of alleged or suspected corruption and corruption-related offenses under the Public Procurement Act 2003 Act 663. B, investigate and prosecute allegations of corruption and corruption-related offenses. So it goes on and on and on.
No, but Doc, a while ago, you said the CSO's call was in order. And you didn't say that the OSP will investigate and will need a warrant from the Attorney General to be able to prosecute. Why are you now making that distinction?
In fact, that was actually a point I wanted to make, but I could not make it before we
let's understand you then.
Yes, exactly. Because, this is just a constitutional point. And the reason for this is this. Now, the power to investigate and prosecute is conferred on the Attorney General under Article 83 of the Constitution. It is not a mandate that Parliament has conferred on the Attorney General. It is something that the Constitution has already conferred on the Attorney General. So Parliament cannot be seeking to confer a power that has been given to one institution to another institution. And I think that should be a point.
Okay, just hold on briefly. Professor H. Kwesi Frempeh, I thought we had gone beyond this point where we raise and question the constitutionality or legality of the OSP. Is that not so?
Well, I don't think that particular point has been litigated, but I think we can, basically the Attorney General is around. If the Attorney General believes that the OSP, a body called the OSP, is exercising the Attorney General's powers unconstitutionally, the Attorney General has everything in their power to basically end that unconstitutionality. In fact, if the special prosecutor were to commence a prosecution, the Attorney General could go to court and enter, make a call for null. So the Attorney General is not without resources, legal resources and constitutional resources to terminate a process commenced by the OSP that they believe is unconstitutional. So for me, I don't particularly see this as a big problem, really. I mean, you can take the OSP as fundamentally just another office within the AG that has been given special remit to handle a particular docket of cases. And at any time, if the Attorney General thinks that this is not constitutional, I don't think there is a problem with the Attorney General saying so, going to court to press the point.
So please explain to me, were we misled into believing
this point here?
Were we misled into believing that we have set up a very important independent office to take on the issue of corruption because attorney generals are always political, appointees and belong to a party and therefore may not be able to prosecute their own? Where did we go or did we come? That's the question.
Well, the Attorney General, I think partly the problem is partly as a matter of how, as a matter of legal tradition and political tradition, we have treated the office of Attorney General. We are not the only jurisdiction with an Attorney General who also happens to be a member of government. That is a fairly common model. In some other jurisdictions where that same model persists or exists, they have been able to develop long-standing traditions of independence, where the Attorney General, albeit a member of government, when it comes to matters of prosecution, they exercise independent judgment. And that prosecution, I mean, unfortunately here we have made prosecution into a political football where even ministers who are not attorneys general, who are not in the office, can go on a campaign platform and promise prosecution. That is wrong, right? The editorial function belongs constitutionally exclusively to the Attorney General. And even the government, if the Attorney General decides to make a prosecution or not that the government doesn't like, the only option they have is to fire the Attorney General. They cannot micromanage the process. Unfortunately, we have not followed that tradition. So we got to a point where we believe that because of the way we have mismanaged the office, the way to signal confidence in our anti-corruption prosecutions was to parcel off the anti-corruption part and give it to another officer who was not similarly situated within the politics. Now, my friend Kwaza has argued, I mean, so I think somewhat persuasively, that we could still, and when I was growing up, the face of prosecution that we saw was the Director of Public Prosecutions. That was the person who went to court all the time. I remember Jakadaku holding that position.
We haven't done anything to the Director of Public Prosecutions. It still exists under the Attorney General.
You would hardly see an auditor, the Attorney General, go to court leading prosecutions, right? They would do other things. They would do policy. They would do other things. But the Director of Public Prosecutions, a civil servant, was the face of prosecution in Ghana. And then, of course, we turned that all around, and the Attorney General now is the one that we want to see in court. There's pressure from the party people. There's pressure from politicians for the Attorney General to do X, Y, Z.
Okay, Professor
over-politicize the office.
Yeah, Professor Frempe, I think that I'll be doing a disservice to my audience if I allow the debate on whether or not the special prosecutor can prosecute or cannot prosecute, because this clearly is an argument we are recycling. It was from the very start, even before the law was passed, after the law was passed. So can we go straight to the Office of the Special Prosecutor's claim that it is unable to prosecute President Mahama because he has bought himself an insurance of being a candidate for the elections? How does that sit with you? Before I go to Bassett on that specific...
No. I really don't think that is a call for the special prosecutor to make. I think that is a political call that ought not to be made by the special prosecutor. The idea, even if he were to say that, look, I am unable to proceed with prosecution because my hands are tied legally. Maybe he cites to a certain constitutional provision. I think even in that situation, the best recourse would have been to get an opinion of the Attorney General to say, look, this is what I have found. Objectively, this is what I have established. I have established that this is the person named government official number 1 by the American and European investigative authorities. And based on these investigations I've done, this is that person. This is the character and identity of that person. Am I, based on this constitutional provision of this, may I proceed with prosecution? That political judgment or judicial judgment, actually, because some would say that, look, probably President Mahama, if that is who he is named, as indeed it is, the person that is named, if that is the person, some have argued that, well, maybe there's a constitutional obstacle here, but that is not a judgment for the OSP to make. You could proceed to court and let the defendant themselves raise that objection and say, look, I am constitutionally immune, and then that goes to the Supreme Court for determination. Right. Or a political judgment because they are candidates, then you go to the Attorney General and say, look, I have this case, I have the facts under the law to proceed, but given the nature of the office holder, may I proceed with the prosecution? And then the Attorney General might offer you an opinion. I don't think it's within the remit of the OSP in this particular matter for him to have made that judgment call that he couldn't proceed with prosecution.
Interesting. Are you disappointed, like the CSO suggested, that you are doing a corruption risk assessment for a JAPA, and suddenly you bring in matters clearly pointed at the political opposition, and that takes the shine of the report?
Well, I think, what is worth doing is worth doing well and properly. I mean, there is no reason why the two investigations could not have been decoupled. There is really no reason why the two should have been lumped together. You could actually do your separate, because after all, with a JAPA, it's a corruption risk analysis you say you are doing. That is different, completely of a different kind from a criminal investigation of the Airbus matter. So I don't really see why the need to lump them together. You could issue a separate Airbus report. I think of all the countries, the investigation had been done largely by the American and European authorities. And of all the countries where malfeasance was reported, I think we're probably the last to actually act. And in our case, the job has been done, assuming that we thought maybe the Americans and the European authorities haven't done a good job. They've at least assembled all the basic facts. Ours is to put names to particular identities and stuff, and then proceed. That shouldn't be rocket science for us to spend so much of our time on. And I think, it's, again, the OSP should just give us an evidential basis for the conclusions they draw on that one. Maybe this is the process I went through. These are the things I went through to determine who government official number 1 is, and this is how I have reached my conclusion. It should not be a subjective conclusion. It should be something based on facts established. And if the person refused to cooperate, then you could make a presumption. You could make a presumption against them on the basis of their refusal to cooperate, but then basically just tell us the basis for it and leave it at that. Go to the AG and say, this is what I found. Are there obstacles to prosecution here?
But the OSP, like Yoko, has police powers. He has powers to arrest. So what's going on? He's daring Mahama. Mahama is daring him back, calling somebody. Mahama is calling him stupid. His actions stupid. He's calling Mahama. Mahama is calling him a coward. He's now saying Mahama is the brave one, so he should come voluntarily. Is that what will be done to a citizen of this country who are said to have been involved in a crime?
I understand that prosecution of a major figure like a former president who is still the leading candidate of the opposition has huge political ramifications. Certainly, you don't want to signal as a country that the government of the day is using prosecution to hound its leading rival in an election that is just pending. So there are all those calculations to be made. But the reason we set up the OSP and the reason
Professor Prempeh, the OSP doesn't think the way you do. The OSP says crime will always remain crime, no matter whose ours is God. He says, I have no brother or friend when it comes to the crusade against preventing corruption and fighting corruption. Ghana first. So what is the point?
Yes, but the conclusion that he then draws undermines the point. If crime is crime, irrespective of the identity or the stature of the person, then if you indeed have established that this person is culpable, he is the person that is so named government official number one, why then do you then turn back and say, oh, but you bought yourself insurance? I mean, so essentially, crime is crime, but you are too big a fish, so I can't go after you. I mean, and yet you say crime is crime. This is why I'm saying that the second part of that judgment was not for him to make. Okay. If it's a political call, leave it to the politicians to make that call, that we don't want to be perceived as hounding our opposition, and therefore we are staying our hand for the time being. Once you make that call as a professional, as an independent prosecutor, then you have lumped in the political with the professional, and I think that's problematic.
So essentially, the special prosecutor should just stop wasting our ears. He should do his work or just stop wasting our ears.
What he has done, in a way, I think the special prosecutor has a lot of tools, right? I mean, what he has done in this case is almost like a name and shame, right? People expecting name and prosecute. And the special prosecutor says, well, I'll choose name and shame. I mean, name and shame would be okay if you gave us the evidential basis for the naming, right? And then somebody else gave us a reason why we could not proceed with the prosecution. If it's because it's constitutionally bad, then we know that, we couldn't prosecute because of that.
All right, thank you.
If it's politically bad, that's not for you to say.
Thank you.
Then let the politicians make
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor H.K.C. Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD Ghana. Thank you very much. Let's get to Dr. Bassett. You were going to make your substantive point on this tussle between the special prosecutor and President Mahama. Please, let's hear you on it.
No, I think that the special prosecutor did a good job. The main part of the report is a well-written report in terms of the rigor of the analysis, the materials that were assessed in coming out with his findings. So the main part of the report, I think, is excellent. But I think the inclusion in the observation section of the report of the Airbus issue and also the EU, I think was a mistake. I think and also was fundamentally flawed. As Professor Prempeh has indicated, clearly, when you look at the analysis that was done on the JPA deal, the analysis that was done before the findings were made, and then you come to the observation session, all you find are just a series of statements without any basis as to how those conclusions were arrived at. So the sense that you get is that that part of the report appears to be an afterthought. It was something perhaps that was inserted without the rigorous process that was used in establishing the preliminary facts in the main part of the report. Now, so I think it's unfortunate, and perhaps maybe we could do this report and ignore, maybe disregard that part of the report. But the difficulty I have with the inclusion of the Airbus and the EU matter in this report is that it may complicate matters for the Office of the Special Prosecutor, especially if he attempts to do further investigation on this matter. One key principle, especially in the investigation, is look, you must come with an open mind, get the evidence before you come to the facts upon which you mount a prosecution. But you get a sense that the special prosecutor here already has taken a view of the matters in terms of some of the statements made. Government number one is this person. One as a matter of fact, you have not even interacted with the person you claim to be government number one. So there might be issues subsequently of appearance of bias if the special prosecutor wants to maybe carry forward with this investigation. I hope these issues do not come up, but on the face of it, expect the lawyers to start raising issues like that. And something. I don't want to resuscitate a debate about the power of the special prosecutor vis-a-vis the Attorney General, but it is important to note that if you are going to have this act to be effective to achieve its purpose, the question of political mediation that has been raised by Prof should be taken very seriously. Okay. Because if you don't deal with the question of political mediation, the fact that the Attorney General can step in at any time. Okay. All right.
All right, Doc. I need to come to my guest in the studio, so we will have you take leave of us here. But I wanted you to say a minute or two, just a minute or two, strictly, on the question of the special prosecutor where he may have erred. What do you make of where he requires the mandate agreement and claims that it should insists that it should go to Parliament for prior approval under Article 88(5)? The Supreme Court has said that only major international or economic transactions are subject to prior parliamentary approval. They have said so in almost all the cases on this subject. In Balkan Energy, they have been very clear about that. And in fact, they say a certification by the Attorney General that an international business transaction to which the government is a party is a major or not should be accorded great weight by the court, although it cannot be conclusive. They say that the nature of the business, which is the subject matter of the transaction, ought to be in a sense of having a significant foreign element, which is, so on the basis of the court's decisions that was the special prosecutor right in saying this should go for parliamentary approval?
Something I think it would be premature actually to maybe conclusively state that it violates Article 1815 of the Constitution. As you rightly pointed out, the Supreme Court has indicated a number of indicia that has to be used to make a determination as to whether an agreement in international business or economic transaction. So unless we have the full test, complement of the agreement for us to be able to do the analysis, who are the parties to the agreement.
No, we know the agreement. We already know what it is. We know that the 5 important documents have gone to Parliament for approval. This one for the procurement of transaction advisors and things, consultants, he said that one too must go to Parliament. I mean, can't you say categorically that he's right or wrong?
No, I think okay, if you want me to, I'll say he's right. Because in Faro Atlantic, yes, what the Supreme Court said was that if you have an agreement between the government of Ghana and a company that is registered outside of Ghana, that is an international economic transaction that requires parliamentary approval. It was only in Barkham that the issue of merger transaction and all that came in. So on the base of Paro Atlantic, on the face of it, it appears Honorable Martin Amidu is right. But I don't want us to be drawing, my view is that...
No, but this is a subset of the major agreements approved by Parliament. Why can't we look at the special prosecutor in the face on the basis of the Supreme Court's own decisions and tell him to the face that he was wrong? Why can't we do that?
I think he was wrong, frankly. I don't think the special prosecutor was wrong. But let's remind ourselves of the ratio of Paro Atlantic. The ratio of Paro Atlantic, which came before Barkham, was that if the government of Ghana enters into an agreement with a foreign entity, that transaction is affected by Article 1815. It was only in the Barkham line of cases and the Sofoton that we have the issue of merger economic transaction coming in with this kind of in detail analysis that has to be done to make a conclusion.
Okay.
So on the basis of that, I think we cannot dismiss the conclusion, the preliminary conclusion.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. I'll come back to the studio, and I need to note that the Supreme Court has said on this matter that the intention of that provision is not, they said that the framers could not have intended the obvious and foreseeable paralysis from overload in Parliament that would ensue from interpreting the provision as covering every single business or economic transaction with an international dimension. That's what they are saying. So if you are saying every single thing they must go to Parliament, then who is doing the work? How is that going to be possible anyway? All right, so back to the studio. And forgive us that we stayed with our guest outside for quite a long time. This show is brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group, close as a partner, MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Rehoboth Properties, having mosquito spray and coil, pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects, and Napa Foods. It's tasty. All right. So, which one of you, who starts after everywhere we have gone? Yes, Bright, you start.
Start on what?
After everywhere we have gone and come to here.
Okay, so I'll make a couple of comments.
Right.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with a special prosecutor citing other cases in a particular risk assessment report, because if the point is to establish a pattern, that's exactly what you do. You cite other case and say this is the pattern. Where I have a difficulty is that part of the report.
But the other cases, is he doing risk assessments?
It doesn't matter. If he has developed insights.
It should matter.
If he's developed insights by doing those other cases, which he thinks are applicable, he can.
You are doing risk assessment. These are prosecution matters.
No, so it doesn't matter. If the subject matter enables him to form insights that are relevant to this matter, he can bring them up.
Graham and his group disagree with you, Professor Prempeh disagree with you, well, but it's fine.
True.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem at all that he brings them up. The only concern I have is that I agree that part of the report appears rushed. So those insights that may come from a pattern that he's established after examining those different cases is not strong. I think that when you look at the Airbus case in particular and the Japan case, the clear pattern that emerges, this increasing use of middlemen or middle organizations to circumvent procurement. So in the case of Airbus, we are talking of Didum and Phoenix. It was quite clear when you look at the Airbus situation that had it not been for these middle players, Airbus could not have paid the kickbacks that Airbus has now admitted it paid. It needed these subcontractors to manage it. And that pattern has now been established very clearly, that the biggest mechanism for circumventing procurement and other controls in the system is subcontracting. So what I expected from him was some clear evidence that he's giving that matter a lot of thought and is going to make recommendations going forward from a preventive point of view of how we can manage this subcontracting problem. Because we all know that in the case of a Japan, it is subcontracting that has led us to very clear evidence of circumvention of public procurement laws. Because if the government had gone ahead with the original idea of having one procurement process for financial proposals and another for the transaction advisor, as opposed to hiring the transaction advisor and then letting the transaction advisor do whatever they want, even though that implicated a set of circumstances where tens of millions of dollars are at stake. Remember, in the proposal that Imara brought, they were talking about 1.8% Sussex fee. So in effect,
that's $4 million.
No, that was a fixed Sussex fee in the mandate agreement.
Okay.
In the proposal, and Amadou makes it clear that 1.8% is not completely clear to him from a reading of the evidence if that 1.8% has been extinguished or not. And that is why he subsequently made the argument that we actually don't know how much Imara and Data Bank were going to make. But at the very least, they expected to make in the region of $80 million, right, in this transaction. Now, for what work? If all they did was confer, go and hire this person, JP Morgan, go and do the transaction structuring, SRK, bring a thing up, but why is that $80 million? It's obscene, right? So in being able to use subcontracting as a means to bypass clear procurement controls, we get into situations where people do work for nothing. And also we then create opacity in which potential payments that are not above board are possible. The second point is this. Through the same subcontracting arrangement, we have now lost sight in the record of how come the Ejapa IPO side of things emerged. Because we know that by 13th August, the government has already decided that I want to do an IPO. It signs the agreement 18th June with Imara. Before Imara has actually started work, before they have the terms of reference, the conferee is already writing to Imara that we want to hire somebody to manage a company, and that company is supposed to undergo an IPO listing. So if the real terms of reference of Imara was to figure out the appropriate transactional structure, how come from the outset they knew it was an IPO?
Okay.
So what job was actually done to determine that an IPO was what was warranted? Because that is what you are paying them $80 million for. Okay. Even if we say it's only the fixed fee, the $4 million. How can you pay somebody $4 million just because they recommend 7 companies or 8 companies? Is that a work you pay $4 million for? And so the point I'm trying to make is that this fundamental...
Is that a work to pay?
Sorry?
Not pay, to pay. So that brings me to the question I was asking. The NDC was saying that the president should retrieve billions that have been spent.
Yes.
Have we spent billions?
No, billions have not been spent. Okay. Because obviously the transaction itself is not in the
billions. The NDC is wrong.
Yeah, they are wrong. I don't understand. I have not read it, so I can't really say emphatically they are wrong. I have not read it.
No, but on the point that they say the president should retrieve billions.
Yeah, if that's what they said, then it's wrong. Yeah.
Right.
So the point I'm making is that when you then move on to the second leg of the transaction, so first of all, how we got to an IPO is not clear in the record.
Okay.
Secondly, it was quite clear that right at the point in which Imara was being given his term of reference, an IPO has been decided. So a major part of the terms of reference that they should determine the optimum transaction structure had already been breached.
Okay.
The company had already been paid for no work done, because their first set of work was to do technical analysis to suggest the optimal structure. Right. The government was already decided to go do an IPO. In the second leg of the transaction, where they outsourced to the people now currently handling the purported IPO preparatory work, JP Morgan and the rest, we know for sure that is also about almost $40 million of work.
Okay.
When you add that up to potential brokerage fees and the rest of it, that may exceed $300 million when this goes on the market. We have found the situation to give hundreds of millions of dollars to people, and it's not clear the work that has actually been done.
That's where
and that is what you need procurement oversight.
And that's where Amidu says that you cannot even determine the fees eventually. Now
eventually, yes.
Yeah, let's come to Dr. Graham. But before that, a couple of your messages. Prince says that after attempting to read the 46-page document by the OSP, I can only conclude that the president doesn't have time enough to read the whole document and understand the implications of the findings. The report is just some way. Why can you say that? The president has an understanding, and he says, let it go back for work to be done. Nana Rules tweets as Mr. Levels 3, says, hi, NewsFile, it's obvious a section of CSOs implicitly are up in arms against the Ejapa deal for whatever reasons best known to them.
No, the reasons have been
but we'd like to know, with respect to their somewhat opposition, what's their proposition in the stead of what government is seeking to do. Okay, so if you had sent this before you heard the propositions, then Elliot, Force and Ampere says that our country can only be better if we allow our institutions to work without fear or favor and uphold our laws in all aspects, allowing professionals to negotiate on such deals like the Ejapa for the interest of Ghana, not otherwise, should be something we should ensure. The politicians will say, you say they are not professionals because some of them are professionals. Mr. Saint says, unfortunately, I feel the same. Is that all? Feeling towards the office of the special prosecutor? Everybody was happy about the creation of the OSP and appointment of Martin Amidu, but alas, all the OSP did was flatter to deceive. Peter Doe Jr. says, interestingly, the very people who defended the biggest ever scandal, PDS, are same defending a Ejapa royalty scandal. As for Special Prosecutor Martin Amidu, calling him a coward is too romantic. Where is his integrity? We were made to believe he has. Nixon Eshen says, it is evident that we have lazy civil society organizations in Ghana, where in the report did it say that finance minister had caused or bent the rules for financial loss. You didn't read it. You haven't read the report. Yes, Dr. Abraham.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think you have made connections between the Ejapa thing, Airbus, and the Ajenim Boating thing. Is that no Ajenim?
PPA.
The PPA. Yeah. Those you have made deductions about subcontracting from them. But if you read what Martin Amidu wrote about Airbus, it doesn't really quite make the point you're making.
Exactly. That's
what that point
the
can
pattern,
be made. So you have made a deduction which is arguable. But what is actually what he says appears to be almost gratuitous in terms of how it is thrown in. The Ajenim Boating case, given that it was a very live issue, the investigation is going on, the president had referred it, I could see that as connected. As a
no, in that case also it's subcontracting.
He has barely a minute to go.
I'm not disputing your theory. I think that the face of the thing as written. I mean, I can understand people wondering what is all this about. And the subsequent development of this unfortunate personal exchange between, Martin Amidu and Mahama, just confirms an impression of there being, something going on. And I think that is an unfortunate development. I think the office should focus on the substantive thing arising or that needs to go forward from the Airbus case, as President Prempe said. Okay. But to come back to your point about the approval by Parliament.
I'm sorry we have run out of time, so you do me 30 seconds. I'm very sorry.
I disagree with you. I think we take the totality of the transaction and its economic importance for the country, which is also one of the things in the Balkan case. There can be no doubt that it should have gone to Parliament.
I see. Yes. Well, the Supreme Court says if the Attorney General gives a certificate that it is not major,
did he give a certificate on
it will go.
No, and
in respect of that, I've seen some people asking that I may be a lawyer, but do I think I know so much? Well, this is the area where I did my LLM, my master's in law. I did it on Article 181. That's my project. Yes. So I think I know it fairly enough. Thank you very much.
I think that Attorney General
Bright Simmons, Bright Simmons is the Honorary Executive of Imani Africa. Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba is Senior Lecturer, University of Ghana Law School. Dr. Yao Graham is Coordinator, Third World Network. Professor H. Kwesi Prempe, Executive Director, CDD Ghana, and Andrew Ejapa Mensah, MP, 2nd D, and Vice Chairman of the Communications Committee of Parliament, who the party pulled out belatedly. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. My outfit is by Woodin.